Question 1. Research into a suspected methamphetamine distribution ring operating within the state of California has led a DEA special agent to observe a known associate of the primary suspect engaging in what appears to be a hand-to-hand transaction in a public park. The associate then enters a vehicle that the agent has reason to believe is used to transport illicit substances. The agent has a strong suspicion that the vehicle contains evidence of the drug operation. What is the most appropriate course of action for the DEA special agent to take immediately following this observation? Option A. Detain the vehicle and its occupant based solely on the agent's suspicion and the observed transaction, without further legal justification. Option B. Approach the associate in the park and attempt to gain consent to search the vehicle, explaining that it will expedite the investigation. Option C. Initiate surveillance on the vehicle to gather further corroborating evidence and then seek a search warrant for the vehicle if probable cause is established. Option D. Immediately stop the vehicle and conduct a search based on the observed transaction and the agent's belief that the vehicle contains evidence. The correct answer is D. Immediately stop the vehicle and conduct a search based on the observed transaction and the agent's belief that the vehicle contains evidence. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift intelligence gathering and the strict adherence to legal and ethical boundaries governing search and seizure. A special agent must exercise careful judgment to ensure that any actions taken are both effective in pursuing the investigation and fully compliant with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The agent's actions must be predicated on probable cause and executed under a valid warrant or a recognized exception to the warrant requirement. The best professional approach involves meticulously documenting all observed activities and information that contribute to establishing probable cause. This includes detailed notes on the suspect's behavior, the location of the suspected illicit activity, and any corroborating evidence gathered through lawful means, such as surveillance or informant tips that meet legal standards. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the requirements of the Fourth Amendment and established DEA investigative protocols. By building a strong, legally defensible case for probable cause, the agent ensures that any subsequent search warrant obtained will be valid, thereby protecting the integrity of the evidence and the investigation from legal challenge. This methodical process upholds the rule of law and the principles of due process. An incorrect approach would be to conduct a warrantless search based on a strong suspicion or a hunch, even if that suspicion is later confirmed by evidence found during the search. This is a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment's warrant requirement, which mandates that searches be conducted pursuant to a warrant issued by a judge based on probable cause, unless a specific, well-defined exception applies. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on information obtained through an illegal wiretap or an unlawful informant tip that was not properly vetted or obtained without due process. Such evidence would be considered fruit of the poisonous tree and inadmissible in court, jeopardizing the entire investigation. Finally, an approach that involves coercing a confession or obtaining consent to search under duress would also be professionally unacceptable and legally invalid, as it violates an individual's Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination and the principles of voluntary consent. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves a continuous assessment of the legality of investigative actions, consultation with legal counsel when in doubt, and a commitment to gathering evidence through lawful means. The agent must always ask, is this action supported by probable cause and a warrant, or a clearly defined exception to the warrant requirement? This rigorous self-scrutiny, coupled with a thorough understanding of constitutional protections and DEA policy, is crucial for effective and lawful law enforcement. Question 2. Which approach would be most appropriate for a DEA special agent in California investigating suspected methamphetamine trafficking, when the primary lead is an informant with a history of providing reliable information, but who suggests initiating contact with a potential target based on a vague tip? Option A. The agent should personally approach the target without the informant to inquire about their knowledge of drug trafficking activities. Option B. Instruct the informant to directly solicit information about drug sources and methods from the target without any prior investigation or controlled purchase. Option C. Develop independent corroboration of the target's alleged trafficking activities through surveillance and intelligence gathering before authorizing the informant to make any contact or controlled purchase. Option D. Immediately authorize the informant to contact the target and attempt to arrange a purchase, relying on the informant's past reliability to ensure the target is predisposed to trafficking. Correct answer is C. Develop independent corroboration of the target's alleged trafficking activities through surveillance and intelligence gathering before authorizing the informant to make any contact or controlled purchase. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need to gather intelligence on potential drug trafficking activities and the imperative to uphold individual rights and avoid entrapment. A DEA special agent must navigate the complex legal landscape of the United States, specifically adhering to the guidelines set forth by the Drug Enforcement Administration and relevant federal statutes concerning undercover operations and informant management. The agent's actions must be carefully calibrated to avoid crossing the line from permissible investigation to illegal inducement. The best approach involves a meticulous and documented strategy that prioritizes the development of independent probable cause before introducing an informant or engaging in any form of controlled substance purchase. This includes thoroughly vetting the informant, establishing clear operational parameters, and ensuring that the informant's actions are directed and supervised by the agent, rather than initiated by the informant without prior agent knowledge or approval. The agent must also ensure that the target's predisposition to engage in drug trafficking is established through independent means, not solely through the informant's efforts. This aligns with DEA policy and federal case law, which generally prohibits entrapment, defined as the inducement of a person to commit a crime that they had no predisposition to commit. The agent's role is to uncover existing criminal activity, not to create it. An approach that relies heavily on an informant to find targets and then pressure them into making a purchase without prior independent evidence of their involvement is ethically and legally flawed. This could be construed as entrapment, violating the target's rights and potentially rendering any evidence obtained inadmissible. Furthermore, failing to adequately supervise the informant, allowing them to operate with significant autonomy, or not documenting their activities, and the agent's direction creates a significant risk of operational misconduct and legal challenges. Another problematic approach would be to engage in direct, uncorroborated communication with a suspected individual without establishing probable cause or utilizing established investigative techniques, as this could be seen as an unwarranted intrusion and could compromise the investigation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the legal standards for probable cause and entrapment. They must then assess the available intelligence, plan investigative steps that build upon existing information, and meticulously document all actions and communications. Continuous evaluation of the informant's reliability and adherence to operational guidelines is crucial. The agent must always ask, are we uncovering existing criminal activity, or are we creating it? Question 3. The evaluation methodology shows that a Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA) special agent in California has established probable cause to believe a vehicle, registered to an associate of a primary drug trafficking suspect, contains a substantial quantity of methamphetamine. The agent knows the vehicle is frequently moved between several known locations. Considering the U.S. Constitution and DEA policy, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the agent to ensure the legality of any potential evidence seizure? Option A. Immediately seek a search warrant for the vehicle from a magistrate. Option B. Wait for the suspect to exit the vehicle and attempt to arrest them, then search the vehicle incident to arrest. Option C. Conduct a warrantless search of the vehicle based on probable cause and the automobile exception. Option D. Inform the suspect of the investigation and request consent to search the vehicle. The correct answer is A. Immediately seek a search warrant for the vehicle from a magistrate. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that a special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA) in California is investigating a suspected methamphetamine trafficking operation. The agent has developed probable cause to believe that a specific vehicle, registered to a known associate of the primary suspect, contains a significant quantity of illegal narcotics. The agent is aware that the vehicle is frequently moved between several known locations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the agent to balance the urgent need to seize potential evidence and prevent its destruction or dispersal against the strict legal requirements for search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and relevant DEA policy. The agent must act decisively, but also ensure their actions are legally sound to prevent the suppression of evidence in court. The best approach involves immediately seeking a search warrant for the vehicle. This is correct because the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures and generally requires a warrant based on probable cause. By seeking a warrant, the agent demonstrates to a neutral magistrate that probable cause exists, thereby satisfying constitutional requirements. DEA policy also emphasizes the importance of obtaining warrants whenever feasible to ensure the legality of evidence collection. This process safeguards the integrity of the investigation and the admissibility of any seized evidence. An incorrect approach would be to immediately search the vehicle without a warrant, relying solely on the probable cause developed. This fails to respect the warrant requirement of the Fourth Amendment. While exceptions to the warrant requirement exist, such as the automobile exception, its application requires specific circumstances that may not be fully met here, and a warrant is always the preferred and more legally defensible course of action when time and circumstances permit. Another incorrect approach would be to wait for the suspect to leave the vehicle and then attempt to arrest them, hoping to seize the vehicle incident to arrest. This is problematic because a search incident to arrest is generally limited to the arrestee's immediate control and may not extend to the entire vehicle if the suspect is already out of it. Furthermore, it risks the vehicle being moved or the evidence being destroyed before the arrest can be made. Further incorrect approach would be to inform the suspect that they are under investigation and request consent to search the vehicle. This is inappropriate as it would likely tip off the suspect, allowing them to dispose of the evidence, and is not a legally mandated or strategically sound method for gathering evidence in a trafficking investigation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and established investigative procedures. This involves 1. Thoroughly developing probable cause. 2. Assessing the urgency of the situation and the risk of evidence destruction or dispersal. 3. Determining if exigent circumstances justify a warrantless search, e.g., immediate danger, imminent destruction of evidence. 4. If exigent circumstances are not clearly present or if a warrant can be obtained in a timely manner, prioritizing the procurement of a search warrant. 5. Consulting with supervisors and legal counsel when in doubt. Question 4. Risk assessment procedures indicate a significant increase in the cultivation and distribution of cannabis within California, a state where cannabis is legal for both medical and recreational use under state law. As a DEA special agent operating in California, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with federal law while acknowledging the state's regulatory framework? Option A. Focus investigative efforts exclusively on state-licensed cannabis dispensaries, treating their operations as inherently suspect under federal law, and disregarding any evidence of compliance with California's state regulations. Option B. Prioritize investigations into cannabis operations that exhibit indicators of violating federal enforcement priorities, such as diversion to states where cannabis is illegal, involvement of criminal organizations, or sales to minors, while respecting state-licensed entities that appear to comply with state regulations. Option C. Cease all cannabis-related investigations within California, as the state's legalization effectively supersedes federal law for all practical enforcement purposes. Option D. Initiate broad investigations into all cannabis cultivation and distribution facilities operating within California, regardless of their state licensing status or operational practices, due to cannabis's Schedule I classification under federal law. The correct answer is B. Prioritize investigations into cannabis operations that exhibit indicators of violating federal enforcement priorities, such as diversion to states where cannabis is illegal, involvement of criminal organizations, or sales to minors, while respecting state-licensed entities that appear to comply with state regulations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a DEA special agent in California due to the inherent conflict between federal law, which classifies cannabis as a Schedule I controlled substance, and California's state-level legalization of cannabis for medical and recreational use. The agent must navigate this complex legal landscape, balancing federal enforcement mandates with the realities of state law and potential public perception. Careful judgment is required to avoid overstepping federal authority or appearing to ignore state-sanctioned activities while still upholding federal law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to the Controlled Substances Act (CSA), as interpreted by the U.S. Department of Justice (DOJ) and the DEA. Specifically, the Cole Memo, though rescinded, its principles regarding federal enforcement priorities remain relevant in guiding discretion, and subsequent DOJ guidance emphasize focusing federal resources on specific enumerated priorities, such as preventing distribution to minors, preventing revenue from going to criminal organizations, and preventing diversion to states where cannabis is illegal. Therefore, the agent should prioritize investigating activities that clearly violate these federal priorities, even within California, rather than broadly targeting all cannabis-related businesses operating in compliance with state law. This approach aligns with the federal government's stated enforcement priorities and respects the nuances of state legalization without condoning violations of federal law. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on state-licensed cannabis dispensaries in California, regardless of their operational practices, would be an incorrect approach. This would represent an overreach of federal authority by targeting activities that are legal under state law and do not necessarily implicate federal enforcement priorities. It fails to acknowledge the DOJ's guidance on prioritizing federal resources. Initiating an investigation based solely on the fact that cannabis is a Schedule I controlled substance under federal law, without any indication of activities that violate federal priorities, is also incorrect. While technically true, this approach ignores the practical realities of federal enforcement discretion and the specific guidance provided to agents on how to allocate resources effectively in states with legalized cannabis. Ignoring the existence of state legal cannabis operations and continuing to investigate all cannabis-related activities with the same intensity as if it were entirely illegal would be an inefficient and potentially counterproductive approach. This fails to recognize the shift in federal enforcement posture and the need for targeted investigations that align with federal priorities, potentially diverting resources from more critical federal law enforcement objectives. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a risk-based, intelligence-driven approach. This involves 1. Understanding the current federal enforcement priorities and guidance related to cannabis. 2. Gathering intelligence to identify specific activities that pose a threat to those federal priorities, e.g., diversion, involvement of organized crime, sales to minors. 3. Prioritizing investigative efforts based on the severity of the federal violation and the potential impact. 4. Consulting with supervisors and legal counsel to ensure actions are consistent with federal law and policy. This systematic process ensures that federal resources are used effectively and appropriately. Question 5. The efficiency study reveals a pattern of suspicious vehicle activity near a known distribution hub for synthetic opioids in Los Angeles, California. A confidential informant, PSI, provides information suggesting a specific vehicle is being used to transport a significant quantity of fentanyl. The CI states they observed the vehicle being loaded with what appeared to be large duffel bags. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the DEA special agent receiving this information? Option A. Document the CI's statement, secure the area around the distribution hub for potential surveillance, and initiate a formal debriefing of the CI by a supervisor to corroborate details and assess reliability. Option B. Dismiss the CI's information as unsubstantiated without further investigation. Due to the high volume of similar tips received and limited immediate resources. Option C. Immediately dispatch agents to intercept the suspected vehicle, conduct a traffic stop based on the CI's information, and attempt to locate the alleged contraband. Option D. Advise the CI to continue observing the vehicle and report back with more specific details, such as license plate numbers and driver descriptions, without direct agent involvement at this stage. The correct answer is C. Immediately dispatch agents to intercept the suspected vehicle, conduct a traffic stop based on the CI's information, and attempt to locate the alleged contraband. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential vulnerability in the interdiction of illicit synthetic opioids within the state of California. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires special agents to balance the immediate need for intelligence gathering with the strict legal and ethical obligations surrounding informant management and evidence handling. The potential for compromised evidence or informant coercion necessitates a meticulous and legally sound approach. The best professional practice involves a multi-pronged strategy that prioritizes legal compliance and operational integrity. This approach would involve immediately documenting the observed activity, securing the scene to preserve potential evidence, and initiating a formal debriefing of the informant under controlled conditions. Crucially, this debriefing would be conducted by a supervisor or designated handler, ensuring that any information obtained is properly recorded and that the informant's rights are respected, thereby preventing potential challenges to the admissibility of evidence in future prosecutions. This aligns with DEA guidelines on informant management and evidence chain of custody, which are paramount for successful investigations and prosecutions. An approach that involves directly confronting the suspected individuals based solely on the informant's tip, without further corroboration or proper documentation of the informant's statement, is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses critical steps in evidence preservation and informant management, potentially rendering any gathered intelligence inadmissible and exposing the agency to legal challenges regarding due process and informant coercion. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to dismiss the informant's tip without further investigation, citing resource constraints. A resource allocation is a consideration. Failing to adequately assess a credible tip about a significant drug trafficking operation, especially concerning synthetic opioids, represents a dereliction of duty and a failure to protect public safety. This neglects the core mission of the DEA. Finally, an approach that involves using the informant to conduct further unauthorized surveillance or to pressure the suspected individuals for more information without proper oversight and authorization is also professionally unsound. This can lead to entrapment issues, informant misconduct, and a breakdown in the chain of custody for any information or evidence subsequently obtained, jeopardizing the entire investigation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the credibility and nature of the information received. This is followed by a thorough review of relevant DEA policies and federal and state laws governing informant operations, surveillance, and evidence collection. The agent must then consider the potential risks and benefits of each investigative step, prioritizing legal and ethical compliance while maximizing the chances of a successful and admissible outcome. Question 6. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a known drug trafficking organization is actively operating from a residential property in Chicago, Illinois. Surveillance has revealed multiple individuals entering and exiting the residence at unusual hours, and a recent confidential informant tip suggests a significant quantity of narcotics is being stored within. Special agents have observed a vehicle, believed to be associated with the organization, leaving the residence and are considering immediate action. Which of the following courses of action best upholds the legal and procedural requirements for a DEA special agent in this scenario? Option A. Contact the confidential informant for additional details and corroboration before initiating any formal investigative steps. Option B. Pursue the vehicle and conduct a warrantless search of its occupants and contents upon observing suspicious behavior. Option C. Wait for the occupants to exit the residence and then conduct a search of their persons and any vehicles they are using. Option D. Immediately seek a judicially authorized search warrant for the residential property based on the accumulated intelligence and informant information. The correct answer is D. Immediately seek a judicially authorized search warrant for the residential property based on the accumulated intelligence and informant information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift intelligence gathering to disrupt ongoing criminal activity and the imperative to adhere strictly to established legal and procedural safeguards. A special agent must balance the urgency of the situation with the constitutional rights of individuals and the integrity of potential evidence. Failure to do so can compromise investigations, lead to the suppression of evidence, and damage the credibility of the DEA. Careful judgment is required to ensure that actions are both effective and lawful. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately seeking a judicially authorized search warrant based on probable cause. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. By obtaining a warrant, the special agent ensures that the proposed search is reviewed by a neutral and detached magistrate who will determine if probable cause exists. This process provides legal authorization for the search, safeguards individual rights, and ensures that any evidence obtained is admissible in court, thereby strengthening the overall investigation and prosecution. This aligns with the investigative protocols mandated by the Drug Enforcement Administration and federal law. Incorrect approach is analysis, pursuing the suspect and conducting a warrantless search based on the observed suspicious activity is professionally unacceptable. While the observed behavior might contribute to probable cause, a warrantless search of a private residence is generally presumed unreasonable under the Fourth Amendment, absent specific exceptions like exigent circumstances. The scenario does not explicitly detail exigent circumstances that would justify immediate entry without a warrant. Relying solely on the observed activity without judicial review risks violating constitutional rights and rendering any seized evidence inadmissible. Contacting a confidential informant for further information without initiating the warrant process is also professionally unacceptable in this context. While informants can be valuable sources of intelligence, their information must be corroborated and presented to a magistrate to establish probable cause for a warrant. Delaying the warrant application process to gather more information from an informant, when probable cause may already exist for a search of the residence, could allow the suspects to destroy evidence or escape apprehension, and it bypasses the necessary judicial oversight for a search of a private dwelling. Waiting for the suspect to exit the residence and then conducting a search of their person and vehicle without a warrant is professionally unacceptable. While there is a lower expectation of privacy for individuals in public spaces and their vehicles, a search of the person and vehicle based solely on the observation of them exiting a residence suspected of containing contraband still requires probable cause, and depending on the scope, may necessitate a warrant. More importantly, this approach fails to address the primary objective of searching the residence itself, where the bulk of the contraband is believed to be located. It also risks the suspects fleeing or disposing of evidence before any lawful search can be conducted. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional compliance and procedural integrity. This involves 1. Assessing the totality of circumstances to determine if probable cause exists for a search. 2. If probable cause is established, immediately initiating the process to obtain a judicially authorized search warrant. 3. Considering exigent circumstances only if there is an immediate and demonstrable threat to life or evidence that cannot be mitigated by obtaining a warrant. And 4. Documenting all actions and justifications meticulously. The goal is to build a strong, legally defensible case that respects individual rights. Question 7. Process analysis reveals that a DEA special agent in New York, investigating a suspected drug trafficking ring, has received credible information from a confidential informant regarding ongoing encrypted communications between key members of the organization. The informant suggests that these communications contain details of an imminent large-scale shipment. Agent is considering initiating electronic surveillance of the suspect's known communication devices to intercept these conversations. Considering the strict legal framework governing electronic surveillance in the United States, what is the most appropriate course of action for the special agent? Option A. Proceed with intercepting the communications based on the informant's tip, assuming the urgency of the situation justifies bypassing formal authorization procedures. Option B. Rely solely on the informant's assurance that the communications are criminal in nature and begin surveillance without seeking independent corroboration or a court order. Option C. Immediately seek a court order for electronic surveillance, providing detailed probable cause based on the informant's information and any corroborating evidence to intercept the specified communications in accordance with Title Roman III of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968. Option D. Initiate surveillance and then attempt to retroactively justify the interception if incriminating evidence is found, hoping the court will overlook the initial lack of authorization. The correct answer is C. Immediately seek a court order for electronic surveillance, providing detailed probable cause based on the informant's information and any corroborating evidence, to intercept the specified communications in accordance with Title Roman III of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift intelligence gathering and the strict adherence to legal and ethical boundaries governing surveillance and evidence collection. A special agent must balance operational effectiveness with the protection of individual rights and the integrity of potential prosecutions. Missteps can lead to compromised investigations, inadmissible evidence, and damage to the DEA's reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting all surveillance activities, including the justification for each intrusive measure, and ensuring that all collected information is obtained in strict accordance with Title Roman III of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968, as interpreted by the U.S. Supreme Court. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and the preservation of evidence for judicial review. Specifically, any electronic surveillance must be authorized by a court order based on probable cause, detailing the nature of the communication to be intercepted and the individuals or facilities involved. The agent's actions must align with the established legal framework for wiretaps and other electronic surveillance, ensuring that the information gathered is legally admissible and ethically sound. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying on informal assurances from informants without independently verifying the legality of the surveillance methods or obtaining the necessary judicial authorization. This bypasses critical legal safeguards designed to prevent unwarranted government intrusion and can render any subsequently gathered intelligence inadmissible in court. It also violates the principle of due process. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with extensive electronic surveillance based on a hunch or a generalized suspicion of criminal activity, without establishing probable cause as required by law. This disregards the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and the specific requirements of Title Roman III for obtaining warrants. Such actions undermine the rule of law and can lead to severe legal repercussions for the agent and the agency. A further incorrect approach is to selectively ignore or downplay information obtained through potentially illegal surveillance, hoping it will not be discovered. This is ethically unsound and professionally negligent. The agent has a duty to report all findings, including any irregularities in their collection, to ensure transparency and allow for proper legal review. Concealing such information compromises the integrity of the investigation and the agent's credibility. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a proactive approach to legal compliance. This involves continuous training on relevant statutes, such as Title Roman III, and understanding the nuances of judicial authorization for surveillance. When faced with ambiguous situations, seeking guidance from legal counsel within the DEA is paramount. A decision-making framework should prioritize the legality and admissibility of evidence above all else, recognizing that a compromised investigation, even if it yields valuable intelligence, ultimately fails its objective if it cannot be used to secure justice. The agent must always operate within the defined boundaries of their authority, ensuring that every action taken is justifiable, documented, and legally sound. Question 8. Compliance review shows a DEA special agent in Illinois observing a known drug trafficker who is actively fleeing in a vehicle. The trafficker's vehicle is rapidly approaching the Indiana state line. The agent has probable cause to believe the trafficker is transporting a significant quantity of illegal narcotics. The agent's immediate jurisdiction is limited to the state of Illinois. Which of the following actions should the agent take to ensure regulatory compliance and the integrity of the investigation? Option A. Immediately cease pursuit at the Illinois state line and notify Indiana law enforcement or the appropriate DEA field office with jurisdiction over that area. Option B. Continue surveillance from the Illinois side of the border without crossing, hoping the suspect will return to Illinois. Option C. Attempt to contact their DEA supervisor for instructions while the suspect is actively fleeing across the state line. Option D. Pursue the suspect's vehicle into Indiana, continuing the surveillance and apprehension efforts. The correct answer is A. Immediately cease pursuit at the Illinois state line and notify Indiana law enforcement or the appropriate DEA field office with jurisdiction over that area. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action in drug investigations and the absolute requirement for adherence to strict legal procedures and jurisdictional boundaries. A DEA special agent must exercise meticulous judgment to ensure that evidence is obtained legally and that actions taken fall within their authorized scope, preventing potential compromise of investigations and legal proceedings. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately ceasing any investigative activity that extends beyond the agent's established jurisdiction and formally notifying the appropriate jurisdictional authority. This approach is correct because it upholds the fundamental principle of jurisdictional integrity, which is paramount in law enforcement. The DEA operates under specific statutory authority and geographical limitations. Exceeding these boundaries, even with good intentions, can render any evidence gathered inadmissible and subject the agent to disciplinary action. By ceasing the activity and notifying the relevant authorities, the agent demonstrates respect for the legal framework and ensures that the investigation can proceed lawfully, either by the appropriate agency or through a properly coordinated interagency effort. This aligns with the DEA's commitment to lawful enforcement and the integrity of the judicial process. Incorrect approaches analysis. Pursuing the suspect into the neighboring state without prior authorization or notification is professionally unacceptable. This action constitutes a clear violation of jurisdictional boundaries. It risks rendering any evidence obtained inadmissible in court due to illegal seizure or improper procedure. Furthermore, it could create interagency friction and undermine the cooperative nature of law enforcement efforts. Continuing the surveillance from the current position without any attempt to contact the neighboring state's law enforcement agency is also professionally unacceptable. While it might seem like a less intrusive action than crossing the border, it still involves operating within a jurisdiction where the agent lacks direct authority. This passive approach fails to address the jurisdictional issue proactively and could lead to a situation where the suspect escapes apprehension or further illegal activity occurs without the proper authorities being aware or able to intervene effectively. Attempting to contact the DEA supervisor for guidance while the suspect is actively fleeing across the state line is professionally unacceptable in this immediate situation. While seeking supervisory approval is generally good practice, the urgency of a suspect actively evading apprehension requires immediate action to preserve the investigation and public safety. Delaying action to await a supervisor's response, especially when the suspect is in motion, could result in the loss of the suspect and critical evidence. The agent should have taken the immediate jurisdictional compliance step first and then reported. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement, particularly DEA special agents, must operate within a strict framework of laws and regulations, with jurisdiction being a cornerstone. When faced with a situation that potentially crosses jurisdictional lines, the immediate priority is to uphold these boundaries. This involves a decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and interagency cooperation. The agent should first assess the immediate threat and the potential for evidence preservation, but always within the context of their authorized powers. If a jurisdictional boundary is about to be crossed or has been crossed, the immediate and correct action is to cease the activity and notify the appropriate authorities. This ensures that the investigation remains legally sound and that interagency protocols are followed, ultimately serving the greater goal of justice. Question 9. Compliance review shows that a DEA special agent in California has received an anonymous tip alleging drug trafficking activity at a specific residence. The agent has observed unusual foot traffic and frequent visitors at odd hours, but has no direct evidence of drug possession or distribution. What is the most appropriate course of action to proceed with a search of the residence? Option A. Conduct a warrantless search of the residence based on the anonymous tip and observe suspicious activity, believing that exigent circumstances may be present. Option B. Confront the residence directly and ask for permission to search the premises, using the information from the tip and observations as leverage. Option C. Prepare a detailed affidavit for a search warrant, articulating all observed suspicious activity and the anonymous tip, and present it to a magistrate for review. Option D. Continue surveillance for an extended period, hoping to witness an overt act of drug transaction before seeking any legal authorization for a search. The correct answer is C. Prepare a detailed affidavit for a search warrant, articulating all observed suspicious activity and the anonymous tip, and present it to a magistrate for review. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action to prevent potential harm and the imperative to adhere strictly to established legal and procedural safeguards. A DEA special agent must exercise sound judgment, balancing investigative urgency with the constitutional rights of individuals and the integrity of evidence. Missteps can lead to compromised investigations, inadmissible evidence, and damage to public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting all observations and information that form the basis for probable cause. This includes any direct sensory input, sight, sound, smell, reliable informant tips, or corroborating evidence gathered through legitimate investigative means. The agent must then articulate this probable cause clearly and concisely in a sworn affidavit to a neutral and detached magistrate. This process ensures that the decision to seek a search warrant is based on objective facts and reviewed by an independent judicial officer, thereby upholding Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures under United States federal law. Incorrect approaches analysis. Initiating a search based solely on a hunch or a vague tip from an unverified source, without independent corroboration or further investigation, violates the probable cause standard. This approach risks an unlawful search and seizure, potentially rendering any evidence obtained inadmissible under the exclusionary rule. Relying on information obtained through an illegal or coercive interrogation to establish probable cause is also unacceptable. Such information is tainted and cannot be used to justify a search warrant, as it violates due process and established legal precedent. Delaying the application for a search warrant after establishing probable cause, in the hope of gathering more incriminating evidence, can be problematic. While thoroughness is important, an unreasonable delay could weaken the justification for probable cause if the circumstances change significantly, or it could be interpreted as an attempt to circumvent the warrant requirement if exigent circumstances are no longer present. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic decision-making process. This begins with a thorough understanding of the legal standards governing searches and seizures, particularly the probable cause requirement. When confronted with suspicious activity, agents should focus on gathering objective, verifiable facts. They must then critically assess whether these facts, when viewed collectively, would lead a reasonable person to believe that contraband or evidence of a crime is present at the location to be searched. If probable cause is established, the next step is to meticulously prepare a warrant application, ensuring all information is accurate and presented to a magistrate for review. If probable cause is not met, the investigation must continue through lawful means. Question 10. Compliance review shows that a DEA special agent in New York, is investigating a suspected cocaine trafficking ring. Intelligence suggests the ring distributed approximately 50 kilograms of cocaine over the past 6 months. The agent needs to estimate the potential illicit profit generated by the distributor to support a search warrant application. Based on DEA financial investigative guidelines and typical market intelligence for cocaine in the New York area, the estimated wholesale price per kilogram is $25,000, and a reasonable profit margin for a distributor at this level is approximately 20% of the wholesale revenue. What is the estimated illicit profit generated by the distributor? Option A. $1. $250,000. Option B, $500,000. Option C, $2,500,000. Option D, $250,000. Correct answer is D, $250,000. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for DEA special agents involving the financial investigation of suspected illicit drug trafficking. The core difficulty lies in accurately calculating the potential illicit profits derived from drug sales, which is crucial for establishing probable cause for search warrants, asset forfeiture proceeding, and understanding the scale of criminal operations. Miscalculations can lead to underestimation of the criminal enterprise's scope, or, conversely, to unsubstantiated claims that could jeopardize investigations. The agent must apply sound financial principles and adhere to DEA guidelines for estimating proceeds of crime. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a conservative estimation of the wholesale price per kilogram of cocaine, multiplied by the estimated quantity distributed, and then factoring in a reasonable profit margin for the distributor. This method aligns with DEA investigative protocols that emphasize using verifiable or reasonably inferred data points. Specifically, using a conservative wholesale price of $25,000 per kilogram and an estimated distribution of 50 kilograms, the gross revenue is $1,250,000. A standard profit margin for distributors in this type of operation, often cited in DEA intelligence reports and financial investigations, is approximately 20%. Therefore, the estimated illicit profit is $1,250,000*0. 20 equals $250,000. This approach is grounded in established financial investigative methodologies and aims to provide a defensible estimate of illicit gains, avoiding speculative inflation. Incorrect approach is analysis. Estimating profits solely based on the retail street value of the cocaine, without accounting for the wholesale cost and the profit margins of intermediaries, is a significant error. This method would drastically overstate the actual profit of the suspected distributor. For instance, if the retail value were $50,000 per kilogram, the total retail value would be $2,500,000, leading to an inflated profit estimate. This approach lacks the financial rigor required for investigative purposes and could lead to inaccurate assessments of the criminal enterprise's financial capacity. Calculating profit by simply multiplying the estimated quantity distributed by a hypothetical retail price per gram, without considering wholesale costs or profit splits, is also flawed. This method ignores the multi-tiered nature of drug distribution and the associated costs and profits at each level. It is an oversimplification that does not reflect the financial realities of drug trafficking operations. Using an arbitrary, high profit percentage without any supporting intelligence or established financial investigative benchmarks is professionally unsound. While drug trafficking is profitable, applying an unsubstantiated profit margin, such as 50% or more, without justification, can lead to exaggerated financial figures that are difficult to defend in court and may undermine the credibility of the investigation. Professional reasoning. When faced with estimating illicit profits, DEA special agents must employ a systematic and data-driven approach. This involves 1. Identifying reliable data points for wholesale costs and estimated quantities. 2. Applying established profit margin benchmarks derived from intelligence and financial analysis, or making conservative, justifiable assumptions. 3. Documenting all assumptions and calculations meticulously. 4. Prioritizing defensible figures over speculative ones, as these estimates will likely be scrutinized in legal proceedings. The goal is to present a reasonable and well-supported assessment of the financial scale of the criminal activity. Question 11. Governance review demonstrates that a DEA special agent in California is conducting surveillance on a suspected methamphetamine production facility. During the surveillance, the agent observes individuals entering and exiting the property with what appear to be large quantities of chemicals and equipment consistent with drug manufacturing. The agent also smells a strong chemical odor emanating from the building. What is the most appropriate course of action for the special agent to take immediately following these observations to ensure compliance with federal law and constitutional protections? Option A. Meticulously document all observations, including the nature of the chemicals and equipment, the timing and frequency of entries/exits, the perceived odor, and the specific location, to prepare a detailed affidavit for a search warrant. Option B. Immediately enter the premises to apprehend the individuals and seize the observed materials, citing exigent circumstances due to the ongoing suspected criminal activity. Option C. Wait until the end of the surveillance period to compile all notes and then submit a request for a search warrant to the appropriate judicial officer. Option D. Contact the informant who provided the initial tip and ask for further details to corroborate the agent's visual observations before taking any action. The correct answer is A. Meticulously document all observations, including the nature of the chemicals and equipment, the timing and frequency of entries/exits, the perceived odor, and the specific location, to prepare a detailed affidavit for a search warrant. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action to prevent ongoing criminal activity and the requirement to adhere strictly to established legal procedures and evidentiary standards. A special agent must balance the urgency of the situation with the imperative to maintain the integrity of any evidence gathered, ensuring it is admissible in court and that individual rights are not violated. Failure to do so can compromise an investigation, lead to the suppression of crucial evidence, and damage the credibility of the DEA. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting all observations and actions taken during the surveillance, including the precise location, time, and nature of any suspected illicit activity. This documentation should be factual, objective, and detailed, forming the basis for any subsequent warrant application or investigative steps. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures and requires probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Detailed, contemporaneous notes are essential for establishing probable cause and demonstrating that any subsequent actions were legally justified and conducted in good faith. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately entering the premises based on the visual observation of suspicious activity without first obtaining a warrant. This violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against warrantless searches of private residences, as such searches are generally presumed unreasonable unless specific exceptions apply, none of which are evident in this scenario. The observed activity, while suspicious, may not rise to the level of exigent circumstances required to bypass the warrant requirement. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the informant's tip without independent corroboration through direct observation or other investigative means. While informant tips can be valuable, they must be corroborated to establish probable cause for a warrant. Acting solely on an uncorroborated tip could lead to a search based on potentially unreliable information, infringing upon constitutional rights and jeopardizing the investigation. A further incorrect approach is to delay reporting the observations and initiating the warrant process until after the surveillance period has concluded. This delay could allow the criminal activity to continue or evidence to be destroyed, but more importantly, it risks the integrity of the information used to establish probable cause. The information must be fresh and presented to a magistrate in a timely manner to justify a warrant. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and evidentiary integrity. This involves a continuous assessment of the situation against established legal standards, particularly the Fourth Amendment. When observing potential criminal activity, agents should focus on gathering objective, verifiable facts that can support a probable cause determination. They must understand the specific requirements for obtaining search warrants, including the need for particularity and probable cause, and the limited exceptions to the warrant requirement. Documentation is paramount, serving as the foundation for all subsequent legal actions. If there is any doubt about the legality of an action, the agent should consult with supervisors and legal counsel before proceeding. Question 12. Compliance review shows that a DEA special agent in New York, received a tip from a confidential source regarding a significant shipment of controlled substances expected to arrive within 48 hours. The source has provided accurate information in the past, but has not been formally registered with the DEA. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the special agent to take? Option A. Immediately initiate the formal process to register the informant and verify their reliability, while simultaneously taking preliminary, legally permissible steps to corroborate the tip without directly acting on the unregistered source's information. Option B. Use the information to conduct immediate searches and seizures, as the urgency of the drug shipment outweighs the need for formal informant registration. Option C. Proceed with surveillance and potential interdiction based on the tip, assuming the source's past reliability is sufficient justification. Option D. Delay formal registration and verification of the informant, relying on the tip for immediate action and planning to address the registration later. The correct answer is A. Immediately initiate the formal process to register the informant and verify their reliability, while simultaneously taking preliminary, legally permissible steps to corroborate the tip without directly acting on the unregistered source's information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between the immediate need to gather intelligence and the strict legal requirements governing the use of informants and the handling of evidence. A special agent must balance operational effectiveness with adherence to the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, and DEA policy, ensuring that any information obtained is admissible in court and does not compromise ongoing investigations or the integrity of the evidence. Failure to do so can lead to the suppression of evidence, damage to an investigation, and disciplinary action. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting the informant's reliability and the basis for the information received, and then immediately initiating the formal process for registering the informant and obtaining necessary approvals for their use. This approach directly aligns with 21 CFR Part 1310 and DEA Order 1001 or its equivalent policy at the time of the scenario, which mandates strict procedures for informant handling, including vetting, registration, and supervision, to ensure the legality and reliability of information obtained. This proactive documentation and adherence to established protocols safeguard the investigation and any subsequent legal proceedings. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately acting on the information without formally registering the informant or verifying their reliability. This violates DEA policy and CFR regulations concerning informant management, potentially rendering any evidence gathered inadmissible and exposing the agency to legal challenges. It bypasses crucial vetting processes designed to prevent the use of unreliable sources or individuals with ulterior motives. Another incorrect approach is to delay the formal registration and verification process, relying on informal assurances from a trusted colleague. This demonstrates a disregard for established protocols and the importance of independent verification. It creates a loophole in accountability and can lead to the introduction of tainted evidence, undermining the integrity of the investigation and the agent's professional conduct. A further incorrect approach is to use the information solely for the purpose of immediate surveillance without any intention of formally registering the informant or developing them further. While surveillance can be a legitimate investigative tool, using information obtained from an unregistered and unvetted source for such purposes, without following proper procedures, still carries significant legal and ethical risks. It fails to establish the necessary chain of custody and reliability for any intelligence that might be used in future enforcement actions. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation must prioritize adherence to established legal and policy frameworks. The decision-making process should involve 1. Recognizing the potential legal and ethical implications of using information from an unregistered source. 2. Consulting relevant regulations e.g. 21 CFR Part 1310 DEA policies to understand the required procedures for informant handling. 3. Prioritizing the formal registration and vetting of the informant before significant investigative actions are taken based on their information. 4. Documenting all steps taken and decisions made to ensure transparency and accountability. Question 13. Cost-benefit analysis shows that focusing federal resources on operations that pose the greatest threat to public safety is the most effective use of taxpayer money. A DEA special agent in California encounters a large-scale cannabis cultivation facility that appears to be operating in compliance with California's state-level regulations. Which of the following approaches best aligns with current federal enforcement priorities and regulatory guidance for such situations? Option A. Consult with California state cannabis regulators to identify any violations of state law and proceed with enforcement based on those findings. Option B. Immediately initiate a raid and seizure of the cultivation facility, as large-scale cannabis operations are inherently a federal concern regardless of state compliance. Option C. Thoroughly review federal statutes, DEA directives, and Department of Justice guidance to determine if the cultivation operation engages in any federally prioritized enforcement activities, such as diversion to illegal markets, distribution to minors, or association with criminal enterprises, before considering any enforcement action. Option D. Assume that any large-scale cannabis cultivation operation, even if compliant with state law, constitutes a federal offense and warrants immediate investigation and potential prosecution. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly review federal statutes, DEA directives, and Department of Justice guidance to determine if the cultivation operation engages in any federally prioritized enforcement activities, such as diversion to illegal markets, distribution to minors, or association with criminal enterprises, before considering any enforcement action. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a DEA special agent in California due to the inherent tension between federal drug enforcement mandates and evolving state-level cannabis regulations. The agent must navigate a complex legal landscape where actions permissible under federal law may conflict with state-sanctioned activities, requiring careful judgment to avoid overstepping authority or undermining legitimate state interests. The potential for misinterpretation of intent and the need for precise adherence to federal guidelines are paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a meticulous review of the specific federal statutes and DEA directives governing the cultivation, distribution, and possession of marijuana in California, particularly in light of the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment and subsequent Department of Justice guidance. This approach prioritizes understanding the precise scope of federal enforcement priorities, which generally do not target individuals or entities complying with state law and not engaging in specific prohibited activities such as distribution to minors, diversion to illegal markets, or association with criminal enterprises. The agent must confirm that the operation in question does not fall into any of these federally prioritized enforcement categories before considering any enforcement action. This aligns with the principle of focusing federal resources on the most significant threats to public safety and national security, as outlined in DEA policy and federal law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately initiate a raid based solely on the presence of a large-scale cannabis cultivation operation, without first verifying compliance with California state law and assessing whether the operation engages in activities that trigger federal enforcement priorities. This fails to acknowledge the nuances of federal enforcement policy in states with legalized cannabis and could lead to the unwarranted disruption of a compliant business, potentially violating principles of proportionality and resource allocation. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that any large-scale cultivation automatically constitutes a federal offense, regardless of state compliance. This overlooks the specific guidance issued by the Department of Justice that directs federal prosecutors and agents to exercise discretion and focus on activities that pose a significant risk, such as those involving violence, firearms, or distribution to minors. Acting on such an assumption would be an overreach of federal authority and a misapplication of enforcement priorities. A further incorrect approach would be to consult only state cannabis regulations and proceed with enforcement based on a perceived violation of those state laws. This is fundamentally flawed, as federal agents are bound by federal law and DEA policy, not state statutes. While understanding state law is important for context, it does not supersede federal jurisdiction or dictate federal enforcement actions. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant federal legal framework and agency policy. This involves identifying the specific federal statutes and any relevant congressional riders or DOJ guidance that impact enforcement in states with legalized cannabis. The next step is to gather intelligence to determine if the operation in question engages in any of the federally prioritized enforcement activities. If the operation appears to be compliant with state law and does not fall into any federal enforcement priority categories, the agent should consult with supervisors and potentially the U.S. Attorney's Office to ensure alignment with federal policy before taking any action. This methodical approach ensures that enforcement actions are legally sound, strategically aligned with federal priorities, and professionally executed. Question 14. Market research demonstrates that illicit drug trafficking organizations in California are increasingly utilizing sophisticated cryptocurrency mixers to launder proceeds. A DEA special agent is tasked with investigating such an organization. Which of the following investigative approaches would be most effective in tracing the flow of illicit funds and building a prosecutable case? Option A. Focusing the investigation solely on the physical movement of drugs and cash, assuming that the cryptocurrency aspect is too complex and legally challenging to pursue effectively. Option B. relying primarily on traditional physical surveillance and informant development to gather intelligence on the organization's activities, with limited focus on the financial aspects of their operations. Option C. Attempting to gain unauthorized access to cryptocurrency exchange accounts suspected of holding illicit funds to expedite the tracing process. Option D. Employing a combination of blockchain analysis tools, subpoenas for cryptocurrency exchange records, and collaboration with financial intelligence units and cryptocurrency tracing experts, while strictly adhering to legal authorization requirements. Correct answer is D. Employing a combination of blockchain analysis tools, subpoenas for cryptocurrency exchange records, and collaboration with financial intelligence units and cryptocurrency tracing experts, while strictly adhering to legal authorization requirements. Explanation: market research demonstrates that illicit drug trafficking organizations in California are increasingly utilizing sophisticated cryptocurrency mixers to launder proceeds. This scenario presents a significant challenge for DEA special agents, as it requires a deep understanding of both financial investigative techniques and the evolving technological landscape of illicit finance. The primary difficulty lies in tracing the flow of funds through anonymizing technologies, which are designed to obscure the origin and destination of cryptocurrency transactions. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for thorough investigation with the legal and technical limitations of cryptocurrency tracing. The most effective approach involves a multi-pronged strategy that leverages specialized forensic tools and interagency cooperation. This approach prioritizes obtaining legal authorization for advanced investigative techniques, such as subpoenas for exchange records and blockchain analysis, while also engaging with financial intelligence units and cryptocurrency tracing experts. By meticulously documenting each step and adhering strictly to legal protocols, agents can build a robust case that withstands legal scrutiny. This aligns with the DEA's mandate to disrupt and dismantle drug trafficking organizations by targeting their financial infrastructure. An approach that focuses solely on traditional surveillance methods without incorporating cryptocurrency tracing expertise would be insufficient. While surveillance can provide valuable contextual information, it cannot directly unravel the complex financial transactions conducted through mixers. This failure to adapt investigative techniques to the specific modus operandi of the target would likely result in an incomplete investigation and an inability to effectively seize illicit assets. Another ineffective approach would be to attempt to bypass established legal procedures in an effort to expedite the investigation. Unauthorized access to cryptocurrency exchange accounts or the use of unverified tracing software would not only be illegal, but would also render any evidence obtained inadmissible in court. This disregard for due process undermines the integrity of the investigation and jeopardizes the prosecution of offenders. Finally, an approach that neglects to collaborate with other relevant agencies, such as the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, or international law enforcement partners, would be a significant oversight. The global nature of cryptocurrency transactions necessitates a coordinated effort to effectively track illicit funds across borders and jurisdictions. Failing to engage in such collaboration limits the scope of the investigation and reduces the likelihood of apprehending all individuals involved in the criminal enterprise. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes proactive adaptation to emerging criminal methodologies. This involves continuous training in new investigative technologies, fostering strong interagency relationships, and maintaining a rigorous adherence to legal and ethical standards. When faced with novel challenges like cryptocurrency laundering, agents must prioritize acquiring the necessary expertise and resources to conduct thorough and legally sound investigations. Question 15. Compliance review shows that a DEA special agent has received credible intelligence regarding a significant drug trafficking operation originating in Illinois and potentially extending into neighboring states. The agent is considering initiating surveillance and potential interdiction activities within Illinois to gather further evidence. What is the most appropriate course of action for the DEA special agent to take to ensure regulatory compliance and effective law enforcement? Option A. Initiate surveillance and potential interdiction operations solely based on federal authority without prior consultation or coordination with Illinois state and local law enforcement. Option B. Proceed with an arrest and seizure of evidence within Illinois without confirming the specific federal nexus or obtaining necessary state/local warrants or consent, relying only on the general authority of the DEA. Option C. Transfer the suspects and any seized evidence directly to federal custody in a neighboring state without proper legal transfer procedures and notification to Illinois authorities. Option D. Immediately notify and coordinate with the relevant Illinois state and local law enforcement agencies to establish a joint operation or have them take the lead within their jurisdiction. Correct answer is D. Immediately notify and coordinate with the relevant Illinois state and local law enforcement agencies to establish a joint operation or have them take the lead within their jurisdiction. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action in drug investigations and the absolute requirement for adherence to established legal procedures and jurisdictional boundaries. A DEA special agent must exercise meticulous judgment to ensure that evidence is gathered lawfully and that actions taken do not compromise ongoing investigations or violate the territorial authority of other law enforcement agencies. The potential for interagency friction and the invalidation of crucial evidence underscores the gravity of jurisdictional considerations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately notifying the relevant state and local law enforcement agencies in Illinois and coordinating with them to establish a joint operation or to have them take the lead within their jurisdiction. This approach respects the established jurisdictional lines and leverages the expertise and authority of local law enforcement. By collaborating, the DEA agent ensures that any actions taken within Illinois are conducted under the proper legal framework, with the full cooperation and authorization of the state and local authorities. This upholds the principle of respecting jurisdictional boundaries, which is fundamental to interagency cooperation and the lawful collection of evidence. Incorrect approach is analysis. Initiating surveillance and potential interdiction operations solely based on federal authority without prior consultation or coordination with Illinois state and local law enforcement is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action disregards the principle of jurisdictional respect, potentially leading to the invalidation of any evidence obtained and creating interagency conflict. It bypasses the established legal protocols for operating within a specific state's territory. Proceeding with an arrest and seizure of evidence within Illinois without confirming the specific federal nexus or obtaining necessary state/local warrants or consent, relying only on the general authority of the DEA, is also professionally unacceptable. This approach fails to acknowledge that while the DEA has federal jurisdiction over drug offenses, operations within a state often require coordination or specific authorization from state and local entities, especially when the primary locus of the activity is within their immediate purview. It risks overstepping boundaries and compromising the integrity of the investigation. Attempting to transfer the suspects and any seized evidence directly to federal custody in a neighboring state without proper legal transfer procedures and notification to Illinois authorities is a violation of jurisdictional protocols. This action bypasses the necessary legal steps for handling individuals and evidence within a state's jurisdiction and could lead to legal challenges regarding the chain of custody and the legality of the transfer. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement, particularly those operating under the DEA, must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and interagency cooperation. This involves 1. Identifying the jurisdictional boundaries of the operation. 2. Consulting relevant federal, state, and local laws and agreements governing interagency cooperation. 3. Proactively engaging with the relevant state and local law enforcement agencies to establish clear lines of authority and operational protocols. 4. Ensuring all actions are taken with the appropriate legal authorization and within the established jurisdictional framework. When in doubt, seeking guidance from legal counsel and superiors is paramount. Question 16. Compliance review shows that a DEA special agent has received credible intelligence regarding a significant drug trafficking operation originating and primarily operating within California. The operation involves the distribution of controlled substances across state lines, but the core activities, including storage and distribution points, are located within California. The agent is stationed in Nevada, near the California border, What is the most appropriate course of action for the DEA special agent to take to initiate an investigation? Option A. Immediately contact the relevant California state law enforcement agencies to coordinate the initiation of an investigation and establish proper jurisdictional protocols. Option B. Conduct covert surveillance of the suspected operation from the Nevada side of the border to gather intelligence before any direct action is taken. Option C. Directly approach and question the suspected individuals involved in the operation within California to gather preliminary information. Option D. Commence a full-scale DEA investigation and arrest operation within California, leveraging federal authority due to the interstate nature of the drug trafficking. The correct answer is A. Immediately contact the relevant California state law enforcement agencies to coordinate the initiation of an investigation and establish proper jurisdictional protocols. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action to prevent potential harm and the requirement to adhere strictly to established legal procedures and jurisdictional boundaries. A DEA special agent must exercise careful judgment to balance these competing demands, ensuring that investigative actions are both effective and legally sound, thereby upholding the integrity of the investigation and the agency's authority. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately notifying the relevant state law enforcement agency in California and coordinating with them to establish jurisdiction and conduct the investigation. This approach is correct because it respects the jurisdictional boundaries of state law enforcement while leveraging their expertise and authority within their territory. The DEA's authority to operate within a state is often contingent on cooperation and established protocols, especially when the primary criminal activity appears to be occurring within that state's borders. This collaborative method ensures that evidence is collected legally, admissible in court, and that the investigation proceeds with the full backing of the appropriate legal framework. Incorrect approaches analysis. Initiating a full-scale DEA investigation and arrest in California without prior consultation or coordination with California state law enforcement would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action oversteps jurisdictional boundaries, potentially jeopardizing the investigation by rendering evidence inadmissible due to improper procedure and violating interagency agreements. It demonstrates a lack of respect for state sovereignty and established law enforcement protocols. Attempting to conduct surveillance from a nearby Nevada border town without establishing a clear nexus to federal jurisdiction or coordinating with California authorities is also professionally unacceptable. While surveillance might seem less intrusive, operating in proximity to a suspected crime scene within another state's jurisdiction without proper authorization or notification can still create jurisdictional conflicts and may not yield actionable intelligence if not properly integrated into a broader, authorized investigation. Directly contacting the suspected individuals in California to gather information without the involvement of state law enforcement or a clear federal nexus would be a serious procedural error. This could alert the subjects, allowing them to destroy evidence or evade capture, and would bypass the established legal channels for evidence gathering and apprehension, potentially compromising the entire investigation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal authority and interagency cooperation. The first step is always to identify the primary jurisdiction where the suspected activity is occurring. If that jurisdiction is a state, then consultation and collaboration with that state's law enforcement agencies are paramount. Agents should then assess whether a federal nexus exists that would grant the DEA primary or concurrent jurisdiction. If a federal nexus is established, coordination remains crucial to ensure a seamless and legally sound investigation. If the federal nexus is weak or absent, the primary responsibility lies with state authorities, and the DEA's role would be supportive, if at all. Question 17. The audit findings indicate a discrepancy in the documented chain of custody for a significant quantity of seized cocaine during a DEA operation conducted in Florida. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the special agent in charge to ensure regulatory compliance and maintain the integrity of the investigation? Option A. Initiate a formal review of the documented chain of custody, cross-referencing physical inventory with written logs and interviewing relevant personnel to identify and rectify any discrepancies. Option B. Rely on the collective memory of the agents involved in the seizure and transport to reconstruct the chain of custody for the missing documentation. Option C. Advise the prosecuting attorney to proceed with the case, downplaying the chain of custody discrepancy as a minor administrative oversight. Option D. Instruct the evidence custodian to immediately update the chain of custody logs to reflect the expected inventory, assuming a minor clerical error occurred. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal review of the documented chain of custody, cross-referencing physical inventory with written logs and interviewing relevant personnel to identify and rectify any discrepancies. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in maintaining the chain of custody for seized controlled substances in a DEA investigation in Florida. This scenario is professionally challenging because the integrity of evidence is paramount to successful prosecution and upholding the rule of law. Any compromise in the chain of custody can lead to the suppression of evidence, jeopardizing the entire case and undermining public trust in law enforcement. Careful judgment is required to ensure all procedures are meticulously followed. The best approach involves immediately initiating a formal review of the documented chain of custody for the specific seized substances. This includes cross-referencing the physical inventory with the written logs, identifying any discrepancies, and interviewing all personnel who handled the evidence. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the audit finding by systematically investigating the integrity of the evidence. It aligns with DEA regulations and Florida statutes governing evidence handling, which mandate a continuous, unbroken record of possession, transfer, and disposition of controlled substances. This meticulous documentation is essential to prove that the evidence presented in court is the same evidence that was seized and has not been tampered with. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the audit finding as a minor clerical error without further investigation. This is professionally unacceptable because it ignores a serious potential breach of evidence integrity. DEA regulations and Florida law require strict adherence to chain of custody protocols, and overlooking discrepancies, even if seemingly minor, can have severe legal consequences. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately relabel or redocument the evidence to match the expected inventory without investigating the actual handling. This is a direct violation of evidence integrity principles and constitutes falsification of records, which is a criminal offense and a severe ethical breach. It undermines the truth-seeking function of the justice system. A further incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the memory of agents involved without consulting the official chain of custody documentation. While agents' recollections can be helpful, they are not a substitute for the legally required written record. Memory can be fallible, and official documentation is the definitive proof of the evidence's journey. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols and regulations. When an audit finding raises concerns about evidence integrity, the immediate step is to trigger a formal investigation into the documented procedures. This involves consulting relevant DEA manuals, Florida statutes, e.g., Chapter 90, Florida Evidence Code, and internal agency policies. The focus should always be on verifying the accuracy and completeness of the chain of custody record and taking corrective action based on factual findings, rather than attempting to retroactively fix documentation without understanding the root cause of the discrepancy. Question 18. Strategic planning requires DEA special agents in California to anticipate potential procedural challenges. During an ongoing investigation into suspected narcotics trafficking, Agent Miller, believing they had sufficient probable cause, conducted a warrantless surveillance of a suspect's residence for 48 hours, gathering significant intelligence. However, Agent Miller later realized that, while probable cause existed, exigent circumstances were absent, and a warrant should have been obtained prior to the surveillance. What is the most appropriate course of action for Agent Miller to take immediately following this realization to ensure the integrity of the investigation and compliance with federal law? Option A. Destroy the notes and recordings from the warrantless surveillance to avoid any evidence of the procedural violation and focus on gathering new, legally obtained intelligence. Option B. Conduct further warrantless surveillance to gather more information that might retroactively justify the initial surveillance or provide additional grounds for a future warrant. Option C. Immediately document the surveillance, report the procedural oversight to their supervisor and the assigned Assistant United States Attorney, AUSA, and seek guidance on how to proceed regarding the gathered intelligence and potential warrant applications. Option D. Continue with the investigation as planned, assuming the intelligence gathered is valuable and can be used to build a stronger case, hoping the procedural issue will not be raised. The correct answer is C. Immediately document the surveillance, report the procedural oversight to their supervisor and the assigned Assistant United States Attorney, AUSA, and seek guidance on how to proceed regarding the gathered intelligence and potential warrant applications. Explanation. Strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of regulatory compliance to effectively guide DEA operations in California. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves balancing the urgency of an ongoing investigation with the strict procedural requirements mandated by federal law and DEA policy. A lapse in adherence to these protocols, even with good intentions, can jeopardize evidence admissibility, compromise operational integrity, and lead to disciplinary action or legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that investigative actions are both effective and legally sound. The best approach involves meticulously documenting all investigative steps, including any deviations from standard procedure, and immediately consulting with the assigned Assistant United States Attorney, AUSA, for guidance on how to rectify the situation and ensure the admissibility of any gathered evidence. This proactive engagement with legal counsel is crucial because it leverages expert legal advice to navigate complex jurisdictional and evidentiary rules specific to federal investigations in California. The AUSA can advise on the proper legal avenues for obtaining necessary warrants or authorizations, ensuring that all actions taken are in full compliance with the Fourth Amendment and relevant federal statutes, thereby safeguarding the investigation's integrity. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with further surveillance without obtaining the necessary warrant, relying on the assumption that the information gathered so far is sufficient justification. This fails to acknowledge the constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, which are paramount in federal investigations. The absence of a warrant, when probable cause exists and exigent circumstances are not present, renders any subsequently gathered evidence inadmissible in federal court in California. Another incorrect approach would be to delay reporting the oversight to supervisors and the AUSA, hoping to gather more information to make up for the initial procedural misstep. This lack of transparency and timely communication is professionally unacceptable. It prevents timely legal intervention and risks compounding the initial error. Furthermore, it undermines the chain of command and the collaborative nature of federal investigations, which rely on open communication to address challenges effectively. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to destroy or discard any information obtained during the warrantless surveillance, believing this will somehow mitigate the procedural violation. This action is not only unethical but also potentially obstructive. It demonstrates a misunderstanding of the investigative process and the importance of preserving all information, even if its admissibility is questionable, for potential review and legal strategy. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal and procedural mandates. When an oversight occurs, the immediate steps should be to 1. Halt any further actions that might be procedurally deficient. 2. Document the oversight and all related circumstances accurately and comprehensively. 3. Promptly consult with legal counsel, in this case the AUSA and supervisors. 4. Follow the legal guidance provided to rectify the situation and ensure future compliance. This framework emphasizes accountability, transparency, and the critical role of legal expertise in federal law enforcement. Question 19. Cost-benefit analysis shows that focusing federal resources on large-scale interstate cannabis trafficking operations in California, rather than on individuals and businesses operating strictly within the state's regulated market, is the most effective use of limited investigative assets. Considering this, which of the following approaches best aligns with the responsibilities of a DEA special agent in California? Option A. Conduct broad enforcement actions against all cannabis-related activities, irrespective of compliance with California state law, to ensure consistent application of federal statutes. Option B. Prioritize investigations into activities that clearly violate federal law, such as interstate trafficking, diversion to minors, or connections to organized crime, while exercising discretion regarding activities compliant with California state law. Option C. Focus solely on enforcing California's state-level cannabis regulations, effectively mirroring state law enforcement efforts. Option D. Engage in enforcement actions based on personal judgment regarding the merits of cannabis legalization, targeting perceived unnecessary operations within the state. The correct answer is B. Prioritize investigations into activities that clearly violate federal law, such as interstate trafficking, diversion to minors, or connections to organized crime, while exercising discretion regarding activities compliant with California state law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a DEA special agent in California due to the inherent tension between federal law enforcement mandates and evolving state-level drug policy. The agent must navigate potential conflicts between their duty to enforce federal statutes, which classify cannabis as an illegal Schedule I controlled substance, and the reality of a state where its possession and sale are regulated and taxed. Misinterpreting or misapplying federal authority in this context could lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, including civil rights violations, damage to public trust, and undermining federal investigative efforts. Careful judgment is required to ensure actions are both legally sound and strategically effective. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing federal law enforcement directives while exercising discretion and considering the nuances of the California regulatory environment. This means focusing investigative efforts on activities that clearly violate federal law, such as large-scale trafficking across state lines, distribution to minors, or involvement with organized crime, rather than solely on activities permitted under California law. This approach is correct because it upholds the agent's oath to enforce federal statutes, including the Controlled Substances Act, while acknowledging the practical realities and limitations imposed by state law. It aligns with DEA guidance that often emphasizes focusing resources on the most significant threats to public health and safety, which typically involve interstate trafficking and large-scale illicit operations, rather than low-level state-compliant activities. This strategic discretion allows for effective resource allocation and minimizes unnecessary conflict with state-level enforcement and public sentiment. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to conduct broad enforcement actions against all cannabis-related activities, regardless of whether they comply with California state law. This fails to recognize the jurisdictional complexities and can lead to the overreach of federal authority, potentially violating the rights of individuals operating within the bounds of state law. Such actions are ethically problematic as they can be perceived as arbitrary and may erode public cooperation with federal investigations. Another incorrect approach is to ignore federal mandates entirely and solely focus on state-level enforcement priorities. This is a direct abdication of the agent's federal duty to enforce federal law, including the Controlled Substances Act. It would mean failing to address federal crimes related to cannabis, such as interstate trafficking, money laundering, or diversion to the black market, thereby undermining the DEA's core mission. A third incorrect approach is to engage in selective enforcement based on personal opinions or biases about cannabis legalization. This is ethically unacceptable and legally indefensible. Federal law enforcement must be applied impartially and consistently, without regard to an agent's personal views. Such an approach would lead to discriminatory practices and undermine the integrity of the DEA. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of federal statutes and DEA policy. They must then assess the specific facts of a case to determine if federal criminal activity is occurring. This involves considering factors such as the scale of the operation, the intended destination of the product, and the involvement of prohibited individuals or groups. Consultation with supervisors and legal counsel is crucial to ensure that any enforcement actions are legally justified and strategically sound. Balancing federal obligations with an awareness of the state's regulatory landscape. Question 20. The performance metrics show a 35% increase in the quantity of seized precursor chemicals in the New York field office over the past quarter, with a total of 500 kilograms seized compared to 111 kilograms in the previous quarter. If the average street value of the finished illicit drug produced from 1 kilogram of these precursor chemicals is $50, and the DEA's operational cost per kilogram of seized precursor is $150. What is the net financial impact of these seizures, assuming all seized precursors would have been converted into finished product? Option A, a net financial gain of $75,000,000, representing the total potential street value of the finished product without accounting for operational costs. Option B, a net financial gain of $74,775,000, calculated by subtracting the total operational cost from the potential street value of the finished product. Option C, a net financial loss of $166,650,000, calculated by subtracting the potential street value from the total operational cost. Option D, a net financial gain of $74,850,000, calculated by subtracting the total operational cost from the potential street value of the finished product, using a rounded figure for the previous quarter's seizures. The correct answer is B, a net financial gain of $74,775,000, calculated by subtracting the total operational cost from the potential street value of the finished product. Explanation: the performance metrics show a significant increase in the quantity of seized precursor chemicals in the New York field office over the past quarter. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a DEA special agent to not only interpret raw data, but also to assess the operational implications and potential threats posed by this surge. A nuanced understanding of drug trafficking patterns, intelligence gathering, and resource allocation is critical. The agent must determine if the increase represents successful interdiction, a shift in trafficking routes, or an escalation in illicit manufacturing activity, all of which have different strategic responses. The best approach involves a multifaceted analysis that integrates the quantitative data with qualitative intelligence. This includes cross-referencing the seized precursor chemical types and quantities with known drug manufacturing methods prevalent in the region, analyzing the origin and destination points of the shipments if identifiable, and correlating the seizures with any recent intelligence regarding new drug production operations or shifts in supply chains. Furthermore, this approach necessitates consultation with intelligence analysts and other field offices to identify any broader trends or coordinated efforts by trafficking organizations. This comprehensive evaluation allows for an informed assessment of the threat landscape and the development of targeted enforcement strategies, aligning with the DEA's mandate to disrupt and dismantle drug trafficking organizations. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the increased seizure numbers as a direct indicator of success without further investigation. This overlooks the possibility that the surge might be due to increased trafficking activity rather than improved interdiction effectiveness. It fails to consider that a rise in seizures could also signal a more aggressive or widespread presence of illicit manufacturing, requiring a more robust response than simply celebrating increased arrests. Another incorrect approach is to attribute the increase solely to a specific trafficking organization without sufficient corroborating intelligence. While a particular group might be involved, making such an assumption prematurely can lead to misdirected resources and potentially alert other organizations to the investigation. It bypasses the critical step of gathering comprehensive intelligence to confirm the scope and nature of the activity. A further incorrect approach is to recommend an immediate, broad-based increase in patrols and checkpoints across the entire New York field office based solely on the seizure data. This is an inefficient allocation of resources, as it does not account for the specific types of chemicals or potential operational areas indicated by the seizures. It lacks the precision needed for effective law enforcement and could lead to wasted effort and reduced impact on actual drug production. Professionals should approach such data-driven scenarios by first understanding the context of the numbers. This involves asking why the numbers are changing, not just what the numbers are. A systematic process of data analysis, intelligence integration, and collaborative assessment with relevant units is crucial for developing effective and efficient operational strategies that align with the DEA's mission.